All right, everybody. So we are live, and Adriana and TJ, thank you so much for joining us today. And everybody watching, welcome. Thank you all so much for being here. So today, what we wanted to explore together is kind of the current state of mental health, given that everything with the last couple of years with COVID, and as we usher in kind of this new era, exploring what mental health issues are present for us and maybe ways in which we can work with that. And also, we have some exciting news that we're going to share with everybody towards the end of the conversation. But first, what I'd really love to kind of lead with is just kind of what we are aware of in terms of mental health being present both in our work, in behavioral health, and just kind of in society at large. So, Adriana, maybe we could start with you. What do you feel is present right now? What do you feel is emerging in terms of mental health, given kind of everything we've been through in the last couple of years?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's in the forefront and becoming in the forefront, right? I mean, mental health, addiction, people have really struggled in this time, in this pandemic. It's really taken its toll on people's well-being in so many ways. I mean, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, socially, right? In every leeway you can figure, people have been struggling. And so, what I see a lot of right now is almost, I mean, a few different things. One is just a huge desire to go back to normal, which I don't know if that will ever really happen. I don't know if we're going back to what was once pre-pandemic. And secondly, there's a real almost existential sort of questioning that I see a lot of people doing, kind of like, what is the point of it all? That's been very prominent for me in what I've noticed lately.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I couldn't agree more. And TJ, what about you? What have you felt lately?
Well, 100% everything that you said, Adriana. And I really do see the foundation of this, the core issue is really about connection, right? And a lot of us have gone into, depending on where we're at in life, what we do for work, what our family situation is, what our relationship status is, the connection hasn't been there in the way that it once was, right? Now, for some people, they've appreciated the pulling back and the going within. I think what I wanted to focus on, though, or what I want to focus on, is what Adriana said about people asking the question, like, what is this all about? What is life anyway? What is my purpose? Why am I really here? And I think there's a light and a shadow to that. I think we're seeing the shadow side of that is we're seeing suicide rates up a lot, where people are asking, what's the point of all of this, right? And choosing to leave planet Earth. And that's obviously painful for a lot of people. Obviously, the person who is at that point of desperation that's making that decision, and also loved ones, family members. The light side of that is we are being asked right now, what is the point of all of this? What meaning are we bringing to life? What purpose can we bring on planet Earth? And we are in the midst of a profound shift. And just to name that, it is 2/22/22. That might mean something to someone, it might not, but I do feel like somehow there's some significance there. And a lot of what I've been hearing is it's a portal of new beginnings and something being transformed and being birthed.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's one of the things I'm most curious about is kind of something that you're both naming, and that's like this really what feels like a massive shift in consciousness, kind of like throughout our culture. And so, like for me, being in behavioral health, of course, like we see people struggling with mental health and addiction, especially after, shelter in place, this collective trauma, the fear, obviously people like losing family members and friends, and so much swirling around. And what I'm curious about, and maybe Adriana, you could speak to this, is what in what ways our consciousness is shifting. And like TJ said, the light and the shadow of what is this all about? How can I find meaning in this? What does that look like for someone who's really in a lot of the pain and suffering over the last couple of years, that are in those existential questions of why am I here? What's my purpose? What does somebody do with that?
Well, I don't think you can actually intellectually understand it. That's the problem. I think people often go to the mind, to the what we might call the ego mind, to try to figure things out, assuming that somehow there's sense to it all. And I don't think we live in a world that's run by a whole lot of common sense or logical sense. You know, people
Mm,
do crazy things all the time for whatever reason they do it. So maybe finding meaning is not something that we discover with our minds. Maybe it's something we discover with our heart or with our spirit. Maybe the answer is not in the mental room, but it's in the spiritual room, or the discovery of it. It may not even be an answer. That's the other thing. Maybe people are looking for an answer to all of this. Maybe there is no answer. Maybe there's just a journey and an exploration and a discovery of something.
mhm. And TJ, what does that journey look like?
Well, I love this because I think when we hear the question, what's the meaning of this? A lot of us hear it through the lens of there must be some inherent meaning or
Mhm.
something outside of us, and we're to discover what that is, right? What was all this about? Why did we go through this? And what we're pointing to is really more of an internal exploration of what do I want to bring to life now. There's a quote that says, something happens, we create meaning about it, and then we react to that meaning, right? And we think we're reacting to what's happening in the world, but it's really the meaning we create about what's happening. For me, I don't want to minimize the pain. I mean, early when COVID first started, I found myself feeling very sad. And the sadness was watching people's fear, quite frankly, and watching the restriction. And I could feel the tense energy all around me. And then on a personal note, like so many people, everything getting canceled and all those opportunities to do my work, which I love and I have so much passion for. And so I had to go within. Well, I didn't have to. I chose to go within and ask myself, what meaning do I want to bring to this? Part of it is allowing myself to feel whatever's present, honoring that, but to also recognize, as Adriana pointed to, maybe there's not some significant meaning that some outside force or something like, we hear people say everything happens for a reason. I actually don't believe that in the way that we frame it, right? We could, have an existential conversation about a deep reason. But I think what people mean by that is, I missed my flight. So maybe the reason is that something's going to happen and I'm not supposed to be in New York today, right? That's the ego mind, like Adriana is saying. But instead, it's like, what do I want to make? What meaning do I want to attach to this? And how do I want to then relate to the meaning that I'm creating? And then, of course, the conversation the three of us love being in is, if it's true that I'm reacting or living from the meaning I'm creating, not what's actually happening, that I can change. I can start to actually change my point of view, change my perspective. And that's where it gets really exciting, because then, oh my gosh, it's not what's happening in the world. It's more about how I'm being with that and what I'm actually bringing, instead of trying to find meaning outside of myself.
Yeah, I
Well,
love
right.
that. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, no. I was just gonna, yeah. I mean, I know we've all loved that. It's like you're creating. You are the creator of your reality, not the outside world is creating your reality. And I think that's the difference. Is that when we talk about in conscious recovery about a victim consciousness, right? It's a very disempowered stance. Like, these external things keep happening to me, rather than what am I choosing? What is the story I'm living by? What is the belief that I'm embracing that is allowing these things to be experienced by me in this way? Because those things are still going to happen. But what meaning am I giving to it? Am I making myself a victim? And am I seeing this through this horrific lens? Or can I see it perhaps as a gift, as an opportunity? What can I change here? How can I grow from this? What can I learn from this? What transformation is possible? That's a very different meaning that it might get attached to the same exact set of external circumstances.
Yeah, I love what you're both saying, and I find myself really curious because I think it sound the way I hear it, I can understand it, I can kind of wrap my head around it, or um I can make sense of it here. And what I'm curious about is if I am in charge of kind of writing the story about what I'm experiencing and creating that reality, would it be true then that the core false beliefs I hold or the stories I have about myself are the filter through which my reality is being created? And if so, how can I work with that? Because I know for me personally, like tons of things have been happening in my life and people around me where it's like these are really kind of extreme circumstances. And I watch some people deal with them in one way and other people in a completely different way. And that's where I can see the story that we're writing about what's happening coming from within. My question is, how do we adjust the lens or the filter through which we tell that story?
Well, for me, it starts with what you said, and I like to add, but only 100% of the time, right? So I'm creating my reality based on my lens, but only 100% of the time. Because when I believe it's 99% my perspective, I suffer. So it starts with that awareness, and not from a place of blame, because blame is a low frequency. And it is interesting that in the last 2 years, a lot of the blame energy has shown up in our culture, a lot of finger pointing. It's coming up because it's wanting to heal. And I'm inviting us to take a look at what gets created if I blame others or blame myself. So we're looking at it through the lens of curiosity. Oh, wow, where did I first start to believe this? What gets created when I believe that? What else is possible? You know, the three of us have done entire shows on living in the question and what that creates, that expansion. What I want to point to in this moment is the 3 steps. And I talk about these 3 steps a lot: awareness, awareness, and awareness. I have to be aware first that I'm creating it, not the situation. See, this is where the mind is a trickster. I love a lot of times in Buddhism, you'll hear the mind referred to as the trickster. What I'm not saying is I'm creating everything on the planet based with my mind. Now, we could have a whole show on that. What I am saying is something's happening, but I'm creating my experience of it because of what I call it. And Jeremy, what you pointed to is it's touching something within me. 3 of us, there are 3 of us here, and everyone watching right now, we would have an experience and all have a different perspective about that experience. I have a friend who told me that one of the most fun experiences he's ever had was spending 3 months in jail. He literally said it was a blast. Now, I can't even conceive of that, right? Because I could give all the reasons that that would be painful for me. So is it wrong or right that he had fun there? Is it my judgment? Is it that there's conditioning that says, oh, that must be horrible? You know, we look at COVID, we look at what's happening, and I think one of the issues, one of the foundational issues is a lot of times we have these points of view that are so unconscious and they're so cultural that, you know, people shouldn't die is one of them. People shouldn't die, but guess what? We live on planet Earth. So far as in our evolution, we are born, we have a life, and we die, right? And so the idea that we're supposed to not die is interesting even in itself. Now, what I'm not saying is, who cares about COVID? Just let people die. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is the suffering that comes from, oh my gosh, this should not be happening, and I should be afraid of this, is really different than, I feel really sad that this is happening, or I'm going to take care of myself, or I'm going to see what the protocols are for me to take care of myself and others. That's really different than, oh my gosh, this shouldn't be happening. This is horrible. Our politicians should be saving us, and all the things that go with that. And that's what actually creates that suffering and that deep sense of disconnection from ourselves and from others.
Right. It's resistance. It's the resisting of what is. It's taking a judgment and saying, this is bad, this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening. And it's a form of resistance. And the spiritual principles, you know, that we talk about with conscious recovery, 2 of the main ones are non-judgment and non-resistance. I wonder, living in the question, what might happen if we were to actually look at where we are judging the current situation on this planet, judging it as wrong, judging ourselves as wrong, resisting what is. And by that, I'm also not suggesting we be a doormat or just sit by passively and let it all happen. But if we're going to change things, it's much easier to change things from a space of neutrality than it is from a space of contraction and resistance. I mean, if you're like this, how can you move? I mean, it's simple energetics.
And so when someone is in a situation, let's say, or they're with pain or suffering as a result of the last couple of years, or any of these things we're really pointing to, and they feel pulled or called to rewrite the way in which they're experiencing it or the way they see it. And they're aware that maybe, wow, like how I'm looking at this may not be serving me. But there's also a lack of clarity as to how to create that shift. You know, I can speak from experience where it's like before I went to treatment and I was addicted, I knew I needed to change. I knew what I needed to do, and I couldn't get myself to move. And so, Adriana, like when you kind of like clenched up like this, I felt that because I've been in that energy, and it's so hard to create any kind of movement in or out of it. And so, what would you say to someone who may be in that where it's like, I know the way I'm viewing this is no longer serving me. I'm open to a new way of holding it or shifting my perspective, but I don't know how to get there. What would you guys say to that?
I mean, I would say reach out to others who do. I mean, reach out for support. There are so many modalities and techniques and communities and groups of people, you know, who have also been through this. You know, like you, Jeremy, being on the other side of an addiction and being clean and sober now for, you know, a long period of time. You've been through that. And when you speak about that, someone else who's in that more stuck place might hear a nugget of wisdom, a light bulb might go off. So I think that's when we reach out. We allow others to support us, to guide us. Maybe we see a professional and we get some counseling, you know, whatever it is. Maybe we go to a 12-step meeting. It doesn't really matter what the action is per se, but it's more just taking that first step and inviting in some new energy, some different energy. That's what I would say.
And one thing to add to that as well is sometimes I think we hear that it's about changing the narrative or changing the story. And I offer something different that sounds subtle, but it's actually in my life very profound. It's not, for me, it's not about changing the story. It's about living beyond the story. So what does that mean? Because that, you know, someone listening might say, well, what's the difference in those two, right? So I remember, and Jeremy, I relate to what you're saying. I remember, you know, I spent 10 years in traditional talk therapy, and like I could identify the root of it. Like, yeah, I know this came from my childhood and my mom, my relationship with her. And so I know this gets what I used to call triggered, right? And that's what's happening. And that's why I'm in these relationships. But what the heck do I do with it? And so then I thought it was about changing myself, changing my mind, changing my narrative, changing the story. And then I realized I could see it for what it is and start to live beyond it. And so what do I mean by see it for what it is? You know, there are thousands of thoughts I can focus on in any given moment. And really the thought that I'm focusing on is it's just as easy for me to look at another one. So maybe the story I've been carrying around, it's not about trying to change it, but to realize what happens when I continue to have that same story. And so to feel into the energy of it, because for me, it's, you know, what Adriana started with, it's not really a mental process. Of course, we use our minds. It's so much more than that. So what is the energy? What is the frequency of that story? And to me, that's where the richness is, because my stories that kept me in the patterns that seemed really destructive were all based in this kind of energy. For me, yeah, restriction, but it was also feeling small and damaged and broken. And that almost felt comfortable because that's where I lived so often, that to try to go beyond that was disorienting. It was scary. So being aware of that frequency and then asking myself the question, if there's no good, bad, right, wrong in this, can I observe this and can I be aware of what it's creating and just start to question the validity of it? Even questioning, I wonder if this is the ultimate truth. Course in Miracles, one of the first lessons is what I know is not all there is to know. And then to be in that, like, oh, look, I've created this whole point of view and this whole frequency and really a whole life based on something that was something I decided when I was 4 years old, without even the ability to actually understand what was happening.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things I want to speak to a little more, TJ, is in the context of the mental health conversation with everything that's been present. I think along with the presence of this deeper questioning, why am I here? What is my purpose? What does it all mean? Kind of that existential stuff that we were touching on. I think what's also present is a lot of guilt and shame for the ways in which we think and feel. And so, TJ, one of the things you speak to often is what it would create to release the paradigm of good, bad, right, wrong. And I was hoping maybe you could elaborate on that just a little bit for people who maybe haven't heard you speak on that before.
Yeah, I mean, we're swimming in this so much. It's like asking a fish to describe water, right? A fish doesn't know water, it's just swimming in it, right? And so for most of us, until we become conscious, and that was certainly true for me, I wasn't even aware I was swimming in a culture, a paradigm in human consciousness that's so deeply entrenched in good and bad and right and wrong. And that's, I mean, it sounds almost cliche to say every war that's ever been created is deeply entrenched in good, bad, right, wrong. It's obvious, right? But what do we do with it? Because, there's someone who comments sometimes on my Facebook post and says, yeah, but some things are just wrong and I need to speak up and stand against it. So what gets created with that? And so what we're not, what, Adriana said it so beautifully. We're not talking about being a doormat. We're not talking about not having opinions. It's what gets created when I'm deeply entrenched in this. What would be possible if I didn't look at someone as wrong, but instead became curious about their point of view? Can you imagine what would happen in the world if each of us in this moment were to pause and actually feel what we're feeling instead of project it outward with this idea that they're wrong and I need to correct it in some way? Right now, we could all take a deep breath and the planet could shift instantly. Sometimes people say, wow, that seems a little like unrealistic. Yeah, that's a point of view too. It's unrealistic that we could all just pause, feel our feelings and no longer project outward. I know it's possible because I've done it in my own life. It wasn't necessarily easy in the beginning, but it's liberating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what I'm really leaning into right now is kind of this trying to reconcile both mental health and the struggles and suffering that we've been in and kind of ways in which we can move forward. And Adriana, at the top of the show, you mentioned that a lot of us are kind of seemingly clinging to getting back to the way things were. And you mentioned that you don't really see us going back to that. And so I'm curious as to where you think we'll go, and not to label it good, bad, right, wrong, of course, but how it differs from where we were.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. When you're talking, Jeremy, what the image that came to mind was of a caterpillar that went in its cocoon and came out a butterfly. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure it's not going back in the cocoon and going back to being a caterpillar. Like life evolves. We evolve. Instead of trying to crawl back into the cocoon, what if we just tried out our wings? It might seem a little weird at first, might seem a little scary. You're jumping off a branch. Now you're going to fly. You might go flop. I don't know. But what would it take to dare to open up to something different, to dare to allow a new reality to take hold. You know, with what we were just talking about with judgment, you know, my little catchphrase is always, judgment is the greatest source of human suffering. It truly is. Internal, external, internal strife, external strife. It's all about this polarity of right and wrong and good and bad. So I'm with TJ. What's beyond that? You know, Rumi, back in the Middle Ages, the Sufi poet said it so beautifully. Out beyond all ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. That's what I'm interested in. And that's what I see opening up on this planet right now, is the possibility for us to choose that. And if enough of us are choosing that, and if it's true that we were living in this quantum field where everything is connected, and if more of us are choosing that vibration rather than the you're wrong and I hate you and I hate me and blah, 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 like, what's that? What would that energetic shift create?
Mm-hmm. And TJ, how do you think we get there?
Well, and I love that because, you know, Rumi, I don't think Rumi was talking about a field with some grass that you're going to go like lie in the sun. I think that field is a field of consciousness, right? And what Adriana is speaking to is, you know, now science is starting to measure what the great mystics have been saying, that there is this field of consciousness, and that's really what creates reality. And when we shift, we start to make a difference on planet Earth. So I think how we get there, you know, we could easily talk for an hour. So I'm going to simply say, I kind of already said this, but first I pause. If there's nothing else, first I pause, because I think the greatest freedom that we can ever have is freedom from the reactive impulse. I still have reactive impulse if I'm not aware of it, and I want to, like, you know, change the feeling. And that's a very, very deep, I'm going to guess, ancestral programming that's been going on for thousands of years. When we were early in our evolution, which we still are early in our evolution. So earlier in our evolution, it was about protecting ourselves from something that was scary, and that was survival. And we've evolved. Now, certainly that still exists on planet Earth. For most of us, it's more about, I'm reacting to something that isn't necessarily even a threat to me. I just believe that it is. Mm-hmm. Right. And we see that finger pointing, we see that name calling, we see that calling people out, canceling people. I did a training not long ago, and I talked about cancel culture, and someone said, well, are you sure it's not just holding people accountable? Sure, but holding them accountable to what standard? My standard. And it's a stretch for people, right? Because we're saying, but people need to be held accountable. Yes, but the one that needs to be held accountable is me, only 100% of the time, right? And what I mean by that is not that we're going to pretend like something's not happening in the world. What I am saying is, I'm accountable for the way I'm showing up with this. Even if we are viewing something that we see as wrong or bad, would the energy of anger and fighting actually help it? Or can we be in the energy of curiosity and wonder what we can offer this situation? So pause, be aware of what I'm feeling, notice if I'm attaching a thought to that feeling, and am I trying to project that outward? And can I start to look within and start to ask these questions? And Adriana is so great at these questions. It's one of the reasons I love partnering with you, Adriana, is you have a brilliant mind in what to do with those moments. I'm kind of passing the ball to you, but like the moment, that was a sports reference. Wow. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm just going to stop there.
I was going to say.
See, things can change. Who knew? Mm-hmm. Wow, I don't even know where. I mean, I could go in 50 different directions with that. I guess, you know, I'm trying to keep it simple today. In the presence of light, darkness cannot exist. So if enough of us choose light, whatever that means and whatever that looks like for each individual, if more of us were to choose light, what would change on planet Earth?
Yeah, I love that. And I think I want to take us in a slightly, I want to detour us just a little bit, because what's coming up for me is in a lot of these like how-to questions, how to open myself up, how to bring awareness to a different story or a different reality, or a lot of these how-to questions. And Adriana, what you named earlier in reaching out and asking for help and seeking support in the process, which I agree is, so important. TJ, I know that something came into the world today, and I wanted to make sure that we had enough time to speak to it and also speak about it in depth. And so, do you want to share with everybody what released today?
Yeah, Adriana and I just released our newest workbook. Now we've co-created 4 workbooks together. And this one is Conscious Recovery from Mental Health. And I'm really, really happy and grateful. And first of all, who would have ever guessed in 2015 when I published my first book that this is my 10th book that I've published that's either co-authored or authored. And Adriana and I have partnered now 4 times on workbooks, bringing my books to life in a very practical way that really does answer a lot of what you're saying, Jeremy, with the how-to. And I know I really want to hear from Adriana, because one of the reasons I love partnering with you, Adriana, is that you bring your unique perspective, and also being a PhD and bringing your years of experience with that into my world. I came in to all of this through the spiritual world, if you will. And then I love partnering with people who came in. We all came in spiritually, first of all, but we come from a different place, but end up in many of the same conclusions. What I want to say before I pass it to you, look, I'm doing it again, is that there is a paradigm in behavioral health and in mental, what once was called mental illness, or I'll leave it at that. There's been a paradigm where it's viewed as something that's bad or wrong, and primarily looking at the symptoms of something and assuming that it's biological or chemical or a permanent condition. And Adriana and I feel very passionately about this new workbook with mental health, because we're asking the question, what if there's more to it than just that? And maybe that's where I'll leave it, because I know, Adriana, we could easily talk about this for 2 hours. So,
well, I think the segue, it isn't actually even really a detour, Jeremy. It's we've been talking like from the 30,000 foot level, right? Because the initial question is like, what is happening in our world in 2022? What's happening with mental health? So we zoom out, right? And we kind of look down on the planet, from this like big distance, and sort of get a sense for that. But then the how is one way to take a deeper dive, is to like, get the book or the workbook, because in there are lots of pragmatic tools. There's a lot of questions. TJ and I love questions. And there's a lot of exercises to kind of get you to that place where you are doing that internal questioning, where we're offering you a shift in perspective, where you're doing your own process of inquiry. And I think that is like, it's like TJ and I like holding your hand as we walk through this together, as we explore this together. A lot of times people get really nervous about the idea of doing shadow work. They're really scared. What am I going to find in there? And I feel like this is such a gentle way to do that. And also knowing that you don't have to do it alone. That we are there with you, and there are many other people that can be there with you as you explore this. I think it's really it's interesting to zoom in and zoom out, and to be able to do both, which I think TJ and I both have a knack for doing. And it's hard to speak in specifics, because every person is so unique and different. But what we tried to do with this workbook was to create the questions that would allow each unique individual to look inside themselves and gain more clarity and see what else might be possible for them.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so exciting, and I love being in conversation, the three of us, because we do that. We pull way back, and then we kind of get back onto the ground in a practical way, which is why I was so thrilled at the Conscious Recovery for Mental Health workbook. I feel like it was the natural progression of TJ's work and your work together to bring this to a whole other demographic of people who aren't necessarily experiencing addiction, but still know that there is something asking for attention. And one of the things I'm really most curious about is how, and this could be for either of you, but how the workbook differs from the Conscious Recovery Workbook for addiction. What was what shifts needed to happen in this workbook, or what new perspectives, or what exactly went into it to specifically kind of be with mental health as opposed to addiction?
Well, if it's okay, I would actually like to start with in what way it's similar, and then maybe Adriana, you can add what way is different, because we have gone back and forth on how do we frame this for someone who isn't experiencing what we would classically call addiction, and what is similar and what is different. So I want to start with what's similar first, if that's okay, Jeremy. And I don't know what I would do if you said it's not okay. I would probably just keep talking anyway. So what's similar about it is the foundation of conscious recovery is always the same, whether we're talking about eating disorder, mental health, for teens, or for addiction, that underneath all of our behavior is an essential self that's whole and perfect. And the foundation of conscious recovery is the knowing that we came into the world as whole and perfect spiritual beings, and then we get programmed to believe that we're something other than that. And most of that programming is unconscious. And we separate from our true nature, and we develop unconscious ideas about ourselves in the world, core false beliefs, we call them, that then create what we call reality. And all of our behavior the behavior is not bad or wrong. The behavior is managing something. So is it strength space? Yes. Is it more than strength space? Absolutely. Because we're looking at it as like, what if that strategy, whatever that is, whether that's overeating, undereating, exercising, I said sex, which we're sexercising, that works too. Any behavior we're using to try to manage this existential disconnection, this shame, this trauma. So that's the way it's similar, because I want to start with that foundation, because that's the core of all of conscious recovery. And then what I love about the collaboration with you, Adriana, is that then we look at how it can be different as well.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about like symptomology, right? Like anxiety, the symptoms of anxiety, the symptoms of depression, it's like, what's underneath that? That's, I think, that like where we're going with it. I guess I also see the similarities more than I see the differences. It's easy for me to translate from addiction to mental health, because fundamentally, the fundamental issue is the same. It's like toxic shame, unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection. And when we say spiritual disconnection, we mean from that part of ourselves that is already perfect and whole. Everything else, the symptomology, the maladaptive behaviors, we use that term in the book, all of that is stemming from those three root causes. So this woman I love, she actually wrote a book called Right Recovery for You. And when she talks about addiction, she says it doesn't even matter what the addictive behavior is, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sexercising, or whatever. The fundamental addiction is to self-judgment, right? That's like what underlies all of it. And so if we were to look at mental health, addiction, eating disorders, you name it, problem behavior, underneath all of it, is there not a fundamental way that we are seeing ourselves that is disconnecting us from our true self, that is creating this toxic shame, is creating then, as a result of that, all these symptoms and behaviors? Let's get to the root of it. Let's quit playing with the symptoms, which is what traditional mental health treatment is doing, is trying to medicate symptoms, is trying to change maladaptive behaviors in a way that never really gets down to the root cause.
Yeah, I love that so much. And the majority of my passion for conscious recovery really comes from, I remember being in the rooms when I was early on getting sober, and it was so many people kind of telling me like, oh, if you think this way, just shift it to think this way. And I remember never really feeling comfortable with that, because I'm like, man, I mean, sometimes being up here, it's like a bad neighborhood. I'm not gonna, if I'm trying to change a thought with a thought, then I'm not going to change anything, because my thoughts are just so wild, right? And I love that in conscious recovery, like one of the metaphors TJ uses is that we're not trimming the branches, we're getting into the roots. And so, and that's one of the things that just resonated with me so deeply. And so, TJ, having this workbook now, how is that supporting the vision of conscious recovery, and what does that look like for the future of conscious recovery, having this mental health piece along with it?
Well, I think there's never been a better time on planet Earth to put out a workbook on mental health than today. And that could be said any day. And in 2022, I think it's even quite possibly more pronounced because of what we've been through collectively. And obviously, there have been traumas on planet Earth throughout history where people are also having mental health issues. And we're at a place in evolution where we're now recognizing that we can do something about it. And when we talk about, I wanted to kind of zero in on something that Adriana talked about. When we talk about what we have called maladaptive behavior, and we use that term in the workbook, not that there's something wrong with it, but that behavior was created to try to manage something, and it worked for a period of time, and maybe now it's not moving us where we want to be. That's all we mean by maladaptive behavior. Or we look at what is sometimes called either a feeling or a condition, depression, anxiety, let's use those two. And we say, okay, what if it's also a strategy, not a conscious one? I know we just did the final revision recently, right before we sent it to the publisher, but we looked at, no one that I know consciously wakes up and thinks, oh, I hope today is one of the high anxiety days. So this isn't conscious, right? Anxiety is something that was really had served us. It protected us. Maybe we grew up in a family system that didn't feel safe. And when I went into anxiety, somehow I could manage something that felt too scary. Depression, maybe that checking out and that closing down, if you will, protected me from something that was really scary. So it started as something that was a brilliant strategy. Now, when I'm working with people that are in either mental health treatment or in one-on-one counseling or therapy, sometimes to say to them, well, maybe your anxiety is not a condition, it's a brilliant strategy, the phrase nothing could be truer but less useful comes to mind, right? To tell someone, we're not telling someone what you're experiencing isn't what you're experiencing. But what the issue is in the paradigm as it's set up, and Adriana, you spoke to it so beautifully, is we have, even within the medical establishment, anxiety bad, get rid of it. Depression bad, get rid of it. And there's obviously, depression it can be really painful. It can be really sad. It can cause a lot of problems. So of course we want to heal that. But the idea that it's bad and we must get rid of it doesn't create the deeper exploration. What's at the root of this? What if depression is a strategy? If it's a strategy, what is it managing? But even deeper than that, and this is what you're speaking to, Jeremy, where did this strategy originate? What was brilliant about it? What is right about this that I'm not seeing? That's a question Adriana asked that I, of course, have co-opted. What is right about this that I'm not seeing? Where did this originate? What's at the core of that? Can I start to heal that? Focus less on getting rid of the depression and focus more about the brilliance of it, where it originated, look at the ways it does serve me, and then the ways maybe that it doesn't. We start to heal the roots of it. The branches start to change on their own.
I think what this workbook really is offering, Jeremy, is we're not trying to replace, anything. Like this isn't a dualistic either or black or white kind of thing. We're not trying to say, look, we're not trying to say there isn't a chemical imbalance. We're not saying that you don't have distorted thinking patterns. We're not saying those things. I think what we're offering is the spiritual lens. Like most of the time in traditional mental health treatment, you're addressing the biological, you're addressing the, intellectual, the emotional, but where's the spiritual in traditional mental health treatment? That's, to me, I think the difference here is that we're trying to offer that spiritual, which is such a nebulous word, but that spiritual perspective on mental health, not at the exclusion of everything else, but to also include this piece. Because I think when we come to the conclusion that it is just this, that it is just a biochemical imbalance in the brain, and we need to add this substance to make it better, we know that that isn't the only answer. That isn't, because you have plenty of people who are walking around on meds who still aren't happy, who are still depressed, who still feel broken and defective inside. We have to look deeper than that and broaden out and include more perspectives beyond just that. But we're not negating those either.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was gonna bring that up, and in line with all of TJ's work and all of Conscious Recovery. One of the things that I hold so dearly is that it is not the only thing. And TJ, I've seen in conferences where he says in front of people, I hope this isn't the only answer. I hope this isn't the only thing, because it is so multidimensional. It is so inclusive, where we've had people that have had 35 years sober in 12 steps who absolutely love conscious recovery for what it does for them on that deeper level in the roots. And so with that, TJ, I'm really excited for where the work will take us into mental health. And so as we kind of bring our conversation to a close, what I'm really curious about from both of you is, what is the highest vision for conscious recovery and mental health?
Well, for me, the highest vision in a practical way is to have conscious recovery be a part of, not a replacement for anything, but in addition, like Adriana said, to the great work that people are doing. So if you're seeing a therapist and you love your therapist and you want to add a spiritual component to it, conscious recovery can be for you. We now have our very first conscious recovery certified mental health facility in Maryland. I'll be going there next month to do the training. Crownsville, part of the Discovery Behavioral Health umbrella. They do so much amazing work. That's part of the vision, right? It's part of the vision is I imagine, because I've worked with people that have been told that they're never going to be able to heal from this, that they can only treat it. And we hear that with addiction. We hear that, you hear that with cancer. You hear that with all sorts of what we have called illness, and there are many of us who have experienced the idea that, yeah, in addition to that idea, what if we also look at, I wonder if it's possible that this isn't a permanent condition, or that this isn't the whole story, as Adriana said. So my big vision for conscious recovery for mental health, just like all of my work, is for one person, one soul at a time, for someone to look in the mirror and ask themselves the question, what if I'm not broken? What if I am underneath all of this whole and perfect? What if all of my behavior, maybe it's been absurd, God knows mine has been sometimes, is trying to reconnect with my true nature? What if your mental health condition isn't the truth of who you are, or at least not the whole story? What if you can heal this? These are the questions that I want to introduce into the world, one soul at a time. That's always been my purpose for anything that is conscious recovery.
Yeah, I would echo that. It's the one, one person at a time is like a divine spark. And my bigger vision is to see the whole planet lit up.
Mm.
If enough people spark, the whole planet will light up. That's what I'm really excited about. And I get it's going to happen. I know it may seem impossible right now, right? The head's like, there's no way. Look at the world we're living in. And yet I have a deep knowing, like deep inside of me, beyond my logic and reason, that says, oh no, it's happening. And it's happening in our lifetimes. It's happening now. Now is the beginning of it.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you both so much. And I'm also very excited for the same thing. I think for me, just in my work in behavioral health, I found myself 2 years ago wishing that conscious recovery was in schools, prisons, all these places along my own journey where I stumbled and could have really used that message that, hey, like things may not seem great. You may think XYZ about yourself, and you as you are whole and perfect. And I ask myself what it would have created at all these major milestones of my life. And I ask that based on what it created in my life when I read it for the first time. And so I'm super thrilled that we get to send this message and deploy it to all our amazing partners in mental health. And because I know that there are so many clinicians who feel the same way, who want to grow beyond just the symptoms and behaviors and the diagnoses and the labels and really get down into who we are in our essence. And so I'm thrilled about it. I'm really excited. We put it on consciousrecovery.com. TJ, is it on Amazon?
It is, yeah. So the best place to go is consciousrecovery.com. Go to the store. You can see all the books and workbooks there, and it's live today, 2/22/22. We have the official published date is actually 2/2/22, 20 days ago. But anyway, there's something there. I don't know what it all means.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you both so much. Adriana, thank you for joining us. As always, it's so much fun to be in conversation with you, and I'm super proud of the new workbook, and I can't wait to see the world light up.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.